Sementilli, the defendant is present. All counsel are present, with the exception of juror number 12 and alternate number 2 of the jury, and also present. Good morning. Alternate number 2 and juror number 12 have been excused for valid reasons that really don't concern us right now. I'm going to ask that an alternate be selected by lot to take the place of juror number 12.
Alternate 3, please have a seat in seat number 12. Alternate 3.
Alternate 3, go ahead and take your materials. Have a seat in box number 12. Welcome to the jury. And people may continue with their opening statement.
Good morning. Welcome back. I just wanted to remind you of what we were talking about when I left off last Friday. We were discussing that on the night of February 21st of 2017, not even a month after the murder of her husband, the defendant was followed to this location, the Dime Bar on Fairfax Avenue, by a surveillance unit, the Gangs and Narcotics Division. As you recall, I talked about the fact that the defendant and Baker went into the location for a while, that the defendant came back out. She was smoking a cigarette, and they observed as she began speaking with the bouncer, began rubbing the bouncer's inner thigh area, grabbed him by the back of the neck and began kissing him. And that those observations will be testified to by Detectives Chang and Anaya during the course of this trial over the next several weeks. Also that same night, this is a text string between the defendant and Jessica, the eldest daughter, who is once again, as you saw in multiple text strings that I presented to you last week, I know it's been several days, is wondering where her mother is, and this is at 10 o'clock at night, and you can see for yourself the defendant's response. One thing that I did want to mention to you is that because of the fact that there are so many witnesses in this case, there's somewhere, I think we started out at somewhere around 200 and cut it down to somewhere around 75. We have many, many witnesses who either don't live in the state or don't live in this country, and we are obviously trying to coordinate everybody's schedules and their various work activities and life events and vacations, and so you may not hear the evidence come in a sequential fashion that makes sense. In other words, we may have to take witnesses out of order, out of chronological order, which is another reason why I'm being so thorough in my opening statement, so that you'll see where we're going, like a roadmap. And I'm talking about some of the witnesses, and then at the end of the case, during closing, I'll have the opportunity again to speak with you and put the witnesses into context, as I mentioned, with respect to the law that Judge Cohen will give you, that will help you to make decisions in this case. So I just wanted to bring that up today because as we're starting with witnesses, perhaps this afternoon we'll start in a sequential order, but then from there you might see that people are being taken out of out of place in a chronological order, but when you hear them talk, you'll say, oh yeah, I remember when Ms. Silverman mentioned this person or this piece of evidence in her very lengthy opening. So the next day, the evening of February 22nd, so remember the defendant is out on the 21st at the dime bar. Her daughter is texting her, where are you? When are you going to be home? The surveillance detectives follow the defendant and Baker back to this location. I think I mentioned this also last week. This was a friend of Baker's, Roger Brown, who you'll hear from in this case, who lived at 331 Salem in Glendale. And after the murder, Baker stayed for a few days with, you'll hear about Sheila Salahian and Ricardo Cabrera, and then after that, towards the end of February, he's staying in Glendale, and the defendant's going back and forth from Glendale to pick him up at night for them to go out. This is a picture of that location, and what you're going to hear is in the early morning hours, around 2:55 in the morning, when the defendant and Baker finally get back to the Salem address where Baker is staying at the time with Roger Brown, Detective Chang installs a GPS tracker on Baker's black Ford Expedition, which is what you see here, and the vehicle was parked at that time in the parking garage of this location. The photograph that you see on the bottom right is a photo of Baker's vehicle. However, that's a photograph that was taken at a tow yard where subsequently it was taken after arrest for purposes of processing and to see the evidence that was in it, which I talked a little bit about last week. The following day, February 23rd, at about 10:28, the defendant posted this. Again, as you read this, you can see how the evidence shows how persuasive she is in trying to get people who are reading these public posts, that being the victim's family and friends, her own family, the co-workers, everybody that knows her. She's posting this on a public platform in order to get across the message that you've seen in multiple posts such as this, that she is completely devastated and heartbroken. So again, as I mentioned last week, showing you the dichotomy once again, and this is almost on a daily basis, between the fake public image that she's posting versus what's going on behind the scenes in her actual life. Later that same night, on February 23rd of 2017, it would be 1 month after the murder of Fabio Sementilli at 9:17 p.m., the defendant once again posts to Instagram along with a photo of Fabio and this caption. Your Honor, could you please inform the jury why it is that they are not seeing the photographs that she's posting?
So, for legal reasons, I have limited the people to showing 2 photos of the decedent in life and no more. It's not because of them, it's because of me, and it's because of legal issues. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Honor. So, she posts a picture of Fabio along with this message. That's why the background that you see seems to be similar on all of the Instagram posts. So if you know about how Instagram looks, you get the idea of what her page looks like, but we're not allowed to show you the actual photos. So she posts a picture of him. This is the caption that she writes, once again trying to get across her sentiment to the public and to everybody that knows her or Fabio that this is really what she's feeling on the inside. Yet, as you know from listening to what I said on Friday and what I continued to talk about this morning, she spent the entire month after her husband of 20 years was slaughtered in their backyard, either with her lover, Robert Baker, or, as you heard, sending him naked photographs of herself or close-up photos of her intimate body parts. Again, that same night, she's out again. And here you see a text exchange between, again, the defendant and her daughter asking when she's coming home. And this occurs on, again, the night of February 23rd, where the defendant once again picks up Baker at Roger Brown's apartment on Salem in Glendale, and they go out for the night. One more thing I want to point out, you'll see that at the bottom she uses the excuse that she's going out to karaoke. You'll see in some of the upcoming messages that I show you that she uses karaoke basically in place of what she's really doing in order to indicate to others, in this case her daughter, that she's doing something that is both innocuous and innocent. On this particular night, she stays with Baker after they go out at the Glendale apartment until 4:22 in the morning before she finally drives home to her daughters. February 25th at 7:59 in the morning, again, the defendant posts this to her Instagram account along with a photograph of Fabio. And you know that this is a lie because later that night, the surveillance crew, G&D again, follows her and Baker to this location, once again, Roger Brown's apartment, where she picks him up. They go out on the town, and they return back to his apartment about 12:41 in the morning on the following day. That would be the 26th, where she stays at this time until 3:14 the next day on February 26th before, again, driving home to her daughters. And once again, during this night, you see once again the same type of text messages between the defendant and her daughter, talking about the fact at 11:40 that she's going to be out late. On February 26th, the following morning when she gets home, as I mentioned, she stays with Baker at his apartment until 3:14 at Roger Brown's. The next morning at 10:24, she posts this along with another photograph of her husband, Fabio. And later this same day, she leaves on a trip for Toronto. And she is in Toronto from February 26th, returning home on March 3rd. Now let me show you about what she posts while she's in Toronto. So on February 27th at 7:17 in the morning, she posts again a photograph of Fabio with this caption. And as you can see here, they're going to visit his burial site that day. And so she posts this. On March 1st at 7:08 in the morning, the defendant again posts a picture of Fabio with this caption about spending time with his mother, talking about how she is spending time with his family and friends. And again, you can see here from this evidence how she is playing the role of the grieving widow and manipulating everybody, including...
I will allow this.
Manipulating everybody, including Fabio's heartbroken mother, who's only son was murdered. Another one, the following day, March 4th, 2017, at 10 a.m., the defendant posts a photo of Fabio with this caption here. Remember I told you about how one of the things Fabio loved to do would be to sit in the backyard in his covered patio and smoke a cigar, and she makes reference to that. On March 4th, the defendant returns home and immediately goes back to her late night activities with Baker, and again you can see the text messages once again between the defendant and her eldest daughter Jessica, asking when her mother's going to be home. A few days later, on March 7th, although the defendant doesn't know, you'll hear that LAPD's Robbery Homicide Division takes the case over from the Valley Bureau detectives who were initially handling Detective Verna and his partner, Detective Parshall, and that at that point in time, the Valley Bureau homicide detectives are working together with robbery homicide detectives because the original detectives had built some rapport with the defendant, and they were assisting Robbery Homicide Division, who is now in the process of getting up to speed and taking over this case. And so you're going to hear from Detective Christopher Gable about their investigation. What you're going to learn is that Detective Gable and his partner, Detective Tellis, decided to have Detective Parshall introduce them to the defendant, and they were, again, going to play a ruse, not indicate that they were from the elite Robbery Homicide Division, who handles, as you'll hear, complex homicide investigations, and they have a lot of other resources available to them because of the nature of the investigations they handle. So they decided to have the initial detectives introduce themselves as, introduce the RHD detectives as members of a knock-knock burglary task force. And so that's how they are introduced to the defendant, so that they don't tip her off that this case is now becoming more significant, and that they know that she's lying to law enforcement and having an affair and involved in her husband's murder. Because as I told you, on February 14th, they received the preliminary hearing results of the DNA from the crime scene, as I talked about, and the interior of Fabio's Porsche, the driver's compartment. On March 8th, 2017, the next day at 8 in the morning, the defendant posts a photograph of herself along with Fabio with this caption. Later on the same day at 9:47 a.m., she posts a photograph of, again, herself with Fabio, showing their wonderful relationship with this particular caption. Again, I pointed this out on Friday. You can see where she ends with the tag sign, Love of My Life. You're going to see LOML, standing for Love of My Life, in various jail letters, what's referred to as kites within the custodial system, to, at that point in time, her co-defendant, Baker. Also on March 8th, I told you that the defendant had multiple calls with Detective Parshall and Detective Verna that were recorded. March 8th was one of those recorded conversations. As I mentioned to you again last week, one of the things that they wanted from her was paperwork regarding the DVR system, the security system, the CCTV camera system that had been set up. And here you have the defendant on tape saying, I haven't found any paperwork or anything like that, even on my debit or my bank cards. My insurance company is going to replace it for me. I just went online and Googled and tried to find out what it looked like, when we know she's lying because she was the one that was there for the install, as you recall. So she goes on to continue telling them that Fabio actually was the one who upgraded the system, lying to them in order to distance herself from the security system. Keep in mind that when you hear things like this, that she's lying about something, usually the reason people lie is because there's some reason for it, right? And in this case, it's because she's trying to distance herself from that remote access to the surveillance system, because that's what she used. Because, again, she's trying to distance herself from the security system because that's what she used in order to assist her in orchestrating the timeline for Fabio's murder. So you can see the investigating officers are questioning her regarding replacement of the system, but she claims she's still waiting for her home insurance company, State Farm, to give her the money to do so. Because remember, she's broke. So again, on March 9th, at about 7:19 p.m., there is a surveillance unit that is following the defendant and Baker. This time, because Robbery Homicide Division has taken over, they use their own surveillance special investigative section that's assigned to robbery homicide. Those individuals work for a unit that's referred to as SIS, the Special Investigations Section, and so they take over from gangs and narcotics doing the surveillance at this point, and they follow the defendant, and they see that she meets up at this petrol gas station across from the defendant's apartment. Baker gives the defendant a bag of clothes. You can see on the right she's showing some of the items of clothing that he's purchased for her, and then the photograph on the left of the two of them kissing. And then at that point, Baker drives the two of them in the defendant's, what was Fabio's originally Ford F-150, and SIS follows them to a location called the Goodnight Bar in Burbank, where they arrive somewhere around 8:15, 8:20 at night, and they stay for a period of time. You'll hear that about 9 o'clock, maybe 5-10 minutes after, the defendant and Baker then drive over to the Laugh Factory Comedy Club on Sunset Boulevard. Once again, you'll hear from the SIS detectives that they're followed to that location. And at that point in time, SIS installs their own GPS device on the defendant's Ford F-150 so that they can track where she's going even without them following her. Again, that same night, this is a string of texts between the youngest daughter, Isabella, recall hearing her 911 call. She's the one that found her father a month and a half earlier, bleeding out dead on their back patio, and at 10:12 that night, she's asking if her mother or her older sister can come home because she's alone all the time and she doesn't like being left alone at this home, and you can imagine why. And then you see the response from her sister saying that she'll be coming home at 11. And this text goes on where she talks about the fact that she's always at the house by herself, that she doesn't like being in this house, and that it's much worse when she's alone. And again, during this time period, we know at 10:15, the defendant is still out with Baker being followed by the surveillance unit. And again, the text messages go on where she says she's making a therapy appointment for the next day. Just to remind you, Isabella at this point in time, she's a 16-year-old girl who found her father stabbed to death. And so this evidence demonstrates for you how important Baker must be to the defendant in order to
Overruled.
This evidence demonstrates once again how important Baker must be to the defendant in order to allow her child to suffer like this alone at home in this house. And you can see the defendant's response, and then what you see that she does is she tries to make her daughter, as you can see, feel guilty by saying, oh, I'm so hurt and disappointed, I'm coming home. Well, she's obviously not going to come home. So you can see that at this point, the daughter has no choice because now she feels guilty for making her mother feel guilty or bad. And so she says, never mind, it's fine. And that's at 10:20. Then the eldest daughter texts her mother separately saying, don't feel bad, have fun being out. And of course, at this point in time, the defendant is still at the Laugh Factory. I mentioned that one of the defendant's close friends was a woman by Deborah Obad who took a couple of photographs, if you recall, of Baker at the wake that took place at the family home on January 29th. Remember those photographs I showed you? And in one of those photographs, if you looked close, you could see that he had a bandage on his index finger, and in the other photo, he was sitting close to the defendant near the fire pit, right in the area where he had slashed Fabio to death days before. On the morning of March 11th, Deborah Obad, who suspects the defendant is having an affair, knows that the defendant is lying, drives by the Sementilli home and sees Baker's Ford Expedition parked in front. So she takes this particular photograph and then sends it over to LAPD detectives Verna and Parshall because she's tipping them off again about Robert Baker. But recall, as of February 14th, she had tipped them off about Baker, but on February 14th, they got confirmation via the initial round of DNA evidence that was analyzed. 3 days later, on March 14th, at about 1 in the afternoon, the defendant posts this to Instagram with a photograph of Fabio. Again, indicating she is his proud wife. Again, with the hashtag love of my life that you'll see in a few minutes. On March 16th, the defendant calls Detective Parshall again. Remember I told you that throughout the course of the investigation, when Valley Bureau Homicide was handling it, she would call on a regular basis because she wanted to know where they were at in their investigation, what evidence they had, and that Detective Parshall and Detective Verna were not going to release anything, and so they kept making excuses to throw her off the trail because they didn't want her to be able to destroy any evidence or to interrupt their investigation. And at this point, she's asking specifically about DNA results from the samples that were collected from Fabio's Porsche. She again mentions to Detective Parshall in this recorded phone call that she's anxious to collect the life insurance proceeds. Remember, we talked about how she started making inquiry about the proceeds the very night of the murder and had her friend Deborah Obad texting the CEO of the company, Sal Macheri, about the life insurance because Monica was asking, and he found it so unusual that he was showing it to people in HR. And she says here in this call that not only is she anxious to collect the life insurance proceeds, but that the HR department at Fabio's company, Wella, needs confirmation from LAPD in order to clear her name so she can get the money. And you'll hear a recording of that call. On the same day, after making that call to Detective Parshall at about, let's say 10:40, 10:45 that night, March 16th, again, the defendant posts to her public Instagram account a photograph of her husband, Fabio, along with this caption. Again, continuing to create the public false impression that she is a grief-stricken widow. And as you read posts like this, you can imagine how that may instill guilt and sadness in other people so that they're willing to do her bidding, which you're going to see coming up. The next day, March 17th at 4:21 in the afternoon, again, the defendant posts to her public Instagram account this quote about her husband, talking about how he was the best husband ever. The following day, March 18th, she's out again with Baker, and the older daughter, Jessica, is asking her mother, are you going to be home late, or like kind of late, or really late? And this is her mother's response. The following morning, after arriving home on March 19th at about 10:45 in the morning, the defendant again posts a picture of Fabio with this caption. I told you the victim, Fabio Sementilli, often referred to his wife by a pet name Pootsie. Here she uses it in the Instagram account. All of which, as we know, is a lie because we know what she's been up to, all of that behavior being totally inconsistent with what she is trying to show here in her public Instagram accounts, that being grief or love for her husband. On March 20th, again, as I said, using the public social media in order to get what she wants, she contacts one of Fabio's colleagues at Wella, Melanie Garibay, who you're going to hear from. And Melanie Garibay was somebody who booked Wella's shows and conventions. These are large-scale shows with hundreds and hundreds of people in Las Vegas. That she had worked through various contacts in Las Vegas in order to, as you can imagine, set up these large conventions and block out rooms for their executive staff like Fabio and other individuals that would be traveling in from around the country and around the world. One of those people you'll hear, her name is Mindy. So the defendant reaches out to Melanie Garibay and tells her, asks her if she can get her a deal on a room in Las Vegas because she claims she needs to get away. She's going to go on a girls' trip, and she lies to Fabio's colleagues in order to get a deal. And of course, Melanie Garibay, feeling sorry for the devastated widow, the defendant, gets her a room at the Vidara at a special executive rate. And you can see here she says, Mindy from the Vidara is going to send you a confirmation tomorrow. And this is the hourly, the nightly rate when you are part of staying as part of a company like Wella. So in other words, if Fabio was traveling, he would get a deal like this because of the business that they did there. And so the defendant gets a $99 a night suite at the Vidara, in this case manipulating Fabio's colleagues to get a deal. After booking her trip, on March 21st at 8:50, the defendant publicly posted this to her Instagram account along with a photograph of herself and Fabio. And you can see that she mentions that she's praying for justice. I will remind you that that is why we are all here in this courtroom today.
That last part was argument.
The defendant and Baker go to Las Vegas to celebrate and have fun from March 23rd to March 26th of 2017. They stay in the $99 a night suite at the Vidara, a fancy hotel, and you'll hear the defendant spends approximately $2,470 over the 4 days, even while she's complaining to everybody that she has no money. And you'll hear that she was complaining she couldn't pay her mortgage, she could no longer pay their pool man, their housekeeper, their gardeners. Late night on March 25th into the early morning of the 26th, while they're in Las Vegas, the defendant and Baker are at the Wynn Casino and the Intrigue nightclub, along with Baker's friends from Las Vegas, who you will hear from, Ron and Michelle Ray. You can see Michelle Ray in the top left photo. You can see Ron Ray with Baker and the defendant in the top right photo in the hat. And then the photograph in the center is a photograph of the defendant along with her lover, Robert Baker, who murdered her husband for her. You're going to hear that Ron and Michelle Ray met Baker in Las Vegas with the defendant for the first time. And you're going to hear that they were interviewed by law enforcement. You're going to hear that, according to the Rays, the defendant seemed to be the person that was in control, that she was controlling Rob Baker. You're going to hear from them she acted like she had a lot of money. When they went out to dinner together, she ordered wine even though they weren't drinking. And she picked up the bill acting like she was the big spender, and the dinner that night was over $500 for the four of them. What you're going to hear that's very unusual is that during this first meeting where they ever met the defendant, she never once mentioned that she had been married. She never once mentioned that approximately a month and a half before, her husband had been murdered. She never mentioned that she even had children. And she certainly didn't act, as you will hear from them, as if she was sad or grieving. In fact, what you're going to hear from Ron Ray is that the defendant talked about how she was planning on buying a home in Las Vegas for Baker, because Baker used to live there and he wanted to have a house there, and that she was going to do this after she sold her expensive house in California. She told them that she and Baker were planning on traveling. They were going to go to Italy, and that Ron Ray was going to add her to his contacts in his phone. And when he asked her for her last name, Baker said, just put Monica Baker, because she has a long Italian last name. And you're going to hear that the defendant just smiled, didn't correct him. And you're going to hear what that constitutes under the law is an adoptive admission when you get the jury instructions in this case. You're also going to hear that Ron and Michelle Ray told detectives that not only was the defendant very controlling over Baker, but that she was extremely loud and obnoxious, and that she repeatedly grabbed Rob Baker by the crotch and talked about his penis size. While in Vegas, at about, this could be when she gets home from her Vegas trip, because she comes home on March 26th. At 8 o'clock at night, the defendant posts another photograph of Fabio with this caption talking about her daily posts and all the kind words and outpouring of love, which means that, as any of you who are on social media know, when you post something, sometimes friends and others will comment on your post and chime in, and what she's telling them is that that was therapy for her. It made her feel so much better, and she is, again, mentioning that she's sorry she wasn't reaching out or responding because she's been so busy, and in this case we know she's been very busy because she's creating the life that she wanted with Baker. The following day, March 27th at 8 in the morning, 8:11, the defendant posts on Instagram again a photograph of Fabio with this caption, and she uses her husband's full name, including his last name. But in reality, we know from what we've discussed, what I showed you last week, the defendant is planning on shedding her last name, Sementilli, which you're going to hear about in the jail lockup recordings, as well as see in the jail mail, or the kites that she sent to Baker, where she signs them Monica Baker, and as she wrote in lipstick, if you remember, on Baker's bedroom mirror in November of 2016. On March 30th, once again, the defendant is out with Baker, and her daughter is asking when she's going to be coming home. And this is, again, the evidence showing when she's balancing these things in her life, the weight of the value of her daughters and their feelings versus what she wants to do, which is spend time with her Baker, which one wins out in the end, as you can see. And that text goes on, and the defendant says maybe she'll be home around 1:30. On April 3rd, again, the defendant posts a photograph, this time of her two children, Isabella and Jessica, along with Luigi, all three of Fabio's children, with the caption that you see here. As I've said, the evidence is going to prove that the defendant not only is extremely deceitful, but that she's a master of manipulation and a very convincing actress. You're going to hear that she used the murder of her husband in order to try and get a deal on a car for herself. And you can see here a text that she sends to her daughters, allegedly while she's at the Ford dealership. In this case, you're going to hear from two different individuals that worked for the Ford dealership. On the left, Gail Burlingame, the salesperson. On the right, Cesar Aviles, who was the sales manager. They're going to tell you about the act that the defendant put on when she came to the dealership on multiple occasions in February, March, and April of 2017. You're going to hear that the defendant initially told them that she wanted to buy out the lease on Fabio's Ford F-150. It was under Fabio's name, and she said that because her husband had passed away, she and her kids really wanted to hold on to his truck because it had sentimental value to them. And you're going to hear that Gail tried to work this out by calling the corporate headquarters. You'll also hear from these witnesses that the next time the defendant came in, she explained that her husband had been murdered, that she didn't have any money or a job, and that she was desperate because she couldn't pay her bills. And she said the holdup was she was waiting on the insurance money to come in before she purchased the truck. And you're going to hear that Gail Burlingame spoke with the defendant by phone and communicated by email with her after that date for several times. Before the defendant returned to the dealership for a third time, you'll hear that Gail Burlingame talked to the defendant on the phone, that the defendant seemed much happier. She said that she had finally received the money, that she wanted to come in and return the truck, because she now decided that she wanted a new car for herself. And so on April 3rd of 2017, the defendant went into the dealership, the Ford dealership, and said she had received the life insurance money from her husband's murder. She was extremely happy, as you'll hear. She looked at multiple new vehicles that she wanted to purchase. You'll hear she was there over 5 hours. She drove several vehicles, and that she kept leveling up to more and more expensive vehicles as she was there. You're going to hear that she eventually settled on a new 2017 Mustang GT. She wanted a convertible, but they didn't have it in the color she wanted, and she didn't want to wait. About 30 minutes after this conversation she had with Gail Burlingame, where she decided on this brand new Mustang GT, Baker comes into the dealership. And the defendant introduces him to Gail Burlingame as her friend Rob, and she tells Baker it's important to her that he liked the vehicle. And you'll hear from Gail that she and Baker began whispering to each other, touching each other, that it was obvious they were in a relationship, and that the defendant purchased every expensive option, including upgraded rims, prepaid maintenance, and various other things on this vehicle, while she still was telling other people that she had no money. After deciding on a $62,000 fully loaded new Mustang, the defendant turned in Fabio's F-150 and sold his Porsche, claiming it was too expensive to keep his vehicles. When the defendant and Baker were arrested on June 14th of 2017, they were both together in this brand new Ford Mustang, and Baker was driving. You're going to hear that the defendant bragged about her new Mustang, that she had a meeting at some point at her house with various individuals that you see here who were working for Fabio's company. These are some of Fabio's colleagues that were on his team at Wella. She told them she had given an Oscar-winning performance at the dealership so that she could get this particular vehicle. When they came to her house to discuss the fact that they were setting up a memorial event for Fabio, and the defendant very excitedly showed off some of the high-end options on her new car, which they found to be unusual. On April 6th at about 5:30 in the afternoon, the defendant posted to Instagram a photo of herself and Fabio along with this caption here. So again, by these daily posts, I'm assuming by now you're getting the gist. That she is creating a completely false perception. And you can see how much work she's putting in on a almost daily basis to create that perception. 2 days later, on April 8th, these are photos taken outside of Baker's apartment building on Independence. Baker is taking pictures and video from inside the defendant's new Mustang as the defendant stood outside the vehicle smoking, as you can see here. These photographs were found in the defendant's iPhone. You can write down, if you're taking notes, number 119. This particular phone will come up again throughout trial. Later that same day, on April 8th at 7:17 at night, the defendant posted on Instagram a photo of Fabio's son Luigi, who was living in Toronto, Canada at the time and attending college, wishing him a happy birthday. And you can see what she wrote about him, her relationship with him, and you'll certainly hear that all of this was fake as well. The following day, on April 9th, at 10:58 at night, the defendant again posts on Instagram a photo of Fabio with this caption here. Obviously, nobody following these public Instagram posts would suspect that she was at all involved in orchestrating her husband's murder. And then April 21st of 2017 at almost 4 o'clock in the afternoon, Bella tells her mother she's on her way home, and you can see the defendant is not at home. She says she's out on Melrose trying to find some clothes, going to dinner, and as I told you, the word she uses whenever she wants to try and create the perception she's doing something innocent or innocuous, she says she's going to karaoke afterwards. After the arrest, Baker's Expedition, I told you, was towed to a tow yard so it could be processed. This receipt was found in Baker's expedition, showing that Baker was with the defendant that day, shopping on Melrose while the defendant was purchasing various items. A little later on that same day, April 21st, Jessica texts to her mother asking where she is, and her mother reiterates dinner and then karaoke. 2 days later, April 23rd at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, the defendant's going out again, and here you can see she's telling her daughters that she might very well be sleeping out of the house that night. She says she's sleeping at Sheila's. You'll hear from Sheila Salahian. The defendant never slept over at Sheila's. Sheila lives with her husband, Ricardo Cabrera, and so, of course, the defendant, we know, was with Baker that night. Again, another lie she tells her daughters. On April 25th, the defendant and Baker go out on a double date with Sheila Salahian and Ricardo Cabrera, who you see here. The defendant and Baker plan to meet them for dinner at Chocho-san in the San Fernando Valley. At about 9:27 that night, the defendant sent the picture that you see here on the right of Baker eating oysters to Sheila because they hadn't shown up yet. Once they get to the location, you'll hear from Sheila and Ricardo that the defendant shows them her new Mustang that she had driven to the restaurant, and she mentions to the couple, that they, meaning she and Baker, bought a new Mustang. During this particular dinner, you're going to hear that the foursome planned another Las Vegas trip, and the defendant and Baker told their friends, Sheila and Ricardo, that they were making plans for their future together. On that same night, April 25th, again, defendant's eldest daughter at 9:18 is asking when she's coming home, which the defendant does not answer. On April 25th, later on in the night, you can see again the exchange between the defendant and her daughter. This is the defendant telling her daughter that since she's the mom, basically she can do whatever she wants. You see here, and throughout what I've been showing you, this is evidence demonstrating that she believes she has zero responsibility at this point for her daughters because she's embroiled in her new life. On May 2nd at 2 in the morning, again, the defendant's out with Baker, and her daughter's asking, when are you coming home? And at 2:50 in the morning, 2:49, she says she's on her way, and at 3:18, she's almost home. And here again, evidence of the same thing I was talking about before. The defendant exhibits no shame. Once again, she hits up Melanie Garibay for a deal for a Las Vegas hotel room. Now she and Baker are going to Vegas with Sheila and Ricardo to celebrate Rob's birthday. And of course, Melanie doesn't hear this. What the defendant tells Melanie is that she's going with friends to Vegas. And so there's a text string between the defendant and Melanie that takes place from April 16th to April 21st. These are portions of their conversation regarding Vegas. You can see here the defendant mentioned she's going back to Vegas the beginning of May. She needs this time a 2-bedroom suite or 2 separate suites. And then you can see once again from Mindy, Melanie's contact in Las Vegas at the Badara, that they have a suite for her and that they will comp one night. And the defendant asks, is this for 2 bedrooms? What's the total? And this is the executive rate that she gets, $199 plus resort fees. And the defendant says, once again, she'll take it. So we know then from May 3rd through the 5th, the defendant, along with her lover, go to Vegas for Baker's birthday. They go and meet Socializing and Cabrera there because they're going for, I think they were there for a Britney Spears concert. And Socializing and Cabrera staying in the other bedroom in this 2-bedroom suite at the Vidara Hotel with them. Monica pays for the whole suite. And you'll hear that they also went out and got together with Ron and Michelle Ray again, and also a friend of Baker's, another friend of Baker's from Las Vegas, Al Birdsong, who I mentioned to you last week. Al Birdsong is the individual where Baker and Austin stayed when they went to Vegas in July of 2016. So while the defendant is claiming that she's broke, she goes to spend 3 days in Vegas, pays for the suite, and she and Baker fly there. May 3rd, the defendant texts this picture to Sheila Socializing at 11:55 in the morning. What you see here is the defendant along with Baker, and in the back, the individual with no shirt on the couch, that's Al Birdsong. Sheila says, "Nice, where is this?" The defendant says, "Vidara Cabana." She purchased a cabana, and you'll see the invoice. On the night of May 3rd of 2017 in Las Vegas, the defendants planned a birthday party for Baker at Marrakesh Restaurant. You can see Ron and Michelle Ray there on the left, Al Birdsong behind them now wearing a black shirt. To the right, Sheila and Ricardo, that's Baker holding the cake with the defendant behind him, and you'll hear that the defendant once again picked up the check and paid for everybody. As I was describing for you, Ron and Michelle Ray mentioned that the first time that they met the defendant in March, the defendant would grab Baker's crotch and talk about his penis size. Here you can see it for yourself, captured in a photograph. You see the defendant grabbing Baker's crotch as they're posing there with Sheila and Ricardo at the Palms Hotel, and a photograph of her out partying on the right. On May 18th of 2017, for the first time, the defendant is introduced by Detective Parshall to the robbery homicide detectives. As I mentioned, Detectives Chris Gable and Tellis, claiming they were from a knock-knock burglary task force, that they believe that this task force may be responsible for Fabio's murder, which again was a ruse or a story they made up. You're going to hear that the detectives from Robbery Homicide Division recorded this interview, that they asked the defendant numerous questions, and once again, just as she did with the detectives from Valley Bureau Homicide, the defendant told one lie after another after another. You'll hear that Detective Gable, who you see here on the top right, asked her specific questions about the route that she took that day when she went to these various locations, such as LA Fitness or the Target or the Ralph's, where she parked, what she did. And you'll hear that her description did not match the surveillance video that law enforcement had gathered from these various locations. Once again, the defendant intentionally failed to mention that she had met up with Baker that day, either at the LA Fitness or in the Target parking lot, or that she was in communications with Baker all day that day, except for the period when the two of them were both in the Target lot together. And once again, she pretended she was unsure of Baker's last name. You'll also hear that, again, she denied knowing about having any remote phone access to her home surveillance system. She showed them a photograph of the safe in her bedroom that's behind a mirror and said the burglars didn't touch it. She explained that every time the mirror covering the safe is open, that she gets a text to her phone. That's part of the security system, and she didn't get any texts. She admitted to them that all of her real jewelry was in the closet and wasn't taken. You'll hear in that day they show her photographs of various items of jewelry, asking if any of it's hers. And she claims perhaps some pearls, a chain, and a set of earrings are maybe hers. You'll also hear that she said the only people that ever really came to the house were Fabio's friends and colleagues, because all of her friends were in the Toronto area. And you're going to hear that she broke down in tears as she cried about her desperate need to be cleared so that she could collect her husband's life insurance money. May of 2017. Between May 26th to May 30th, the defendant and Baker go on yet another trip. This time they go to Myrtle Beach for Atlantic Beach Bike Week in South Carolina. And you'll hear the defendant spent approximately $834 there, not including flight or hotel, and that the history on her phone indicates that she and Baker were out driving around to various individuals' homes, swinging during some of the evenings they were there. You can see here on the top left that on May 18th, the defendant purchased tickets for the Paradise Party compound. She, as you'll hear, told her friends and family she was going alone to Myrtle Beach, and the reason she was going was to walk a golf course that Fabio had always wanted to play golf at in his honor. And at the top left, you can see is the defendant's email account, Hotmail account, which you're going to hear about. And on the bottom right is the ticket that she purchased for to attend the party. This is a photograph on the left of the defendant at the Paradise Party compound, a photograph of her and Baker together on the right. These photographs were recovered from Baker's SD card 157, which you'll hear about. This is a text string between the defendant and her sister, Anna Larson, where her sister confronts her and says she knows that Monica is lying about going alone to Myrtle Beach and questions her about who she's with. And you'll see throughout the text thread, the defendant continues as she lies to everybody else, lies to her sister. And the one thing that she says that is true is what we've been talking about, which is that the defendant is a completely different person from who everybody else thinks she is. And she admits this in this text message, although she continues to lie, saying she's together honoring Fabio by walking a golf course. This is photographs of the defendant and Baker together on June 2nd and 4th, recovered again from Baker's SD card, 157. This is June 6th, where SIS surveillance, again, is following the defendant and Baker. They're followed to LA Fitness. They installed, while the defendant and Baker were inside of LA Fitness, a GPS device on the defendant's Mustang in the LA Fitness parking lot. And you're going to hear from SIS detectives Dave Frederick and others from his unit. On June 7th of 2017, you can see the defendant's web history, and what she's doing here is she's researching how to know if law enforcement is tracking her phone. She does these searches on her LG tablet, which is item 82, which you'll hear about during the course of the trial, which obviously indicates that she's worried the police are investigating her, perhaps tapping her phones or following her. And you can see the various things, queries that she researches on her tablet, including, do the police have the right to tap my phone? 6 cell phone tap signs. How do you know if your cell phone's being tapped by the police? What type of phones can be tapped? 5 things to know about police cell phone spying. And police can't read your iMessages, but here's what they can see. Again, this is evidence that is inconsistent with the innocent act she's trying to display. Also is inconsistent with having nothing to hide but for an affair. Shows that she was concerned about what the police might find on her phone, and you'll hear jury instructions at the end of this case from His Honor regarding something called consciousness of guilt. These are a couple of the articles that she pulled up so that she could read about what the police would be able to see on her phone. On June 9th of 2017 at 6 o'clock at night, Detective Parshall sends the defendant an email, which is a ruse. Again, it's fake. It's meant to stimulate, to see what she'll do. He says, "We're clear," because she's been asking for months. "We're clear on the letter for the life insurance. My secretary is typing it up. At MetLife, the life insurance carrier for Fabio's policy, should have it by the end of next week or the following week." Now, at this point in time, the LAPD, Detective Parshall, and Verna are having communications because, as I told you, robbery homicide detectives are going to take over this case, and they are now in the planning stages on taking down the defendant and her lover, Robert Baker, for the murder of Fabio Sementilli. And so to calm her down so she stops bothering them, calling daily, and to see what she'll do, they send this message to her saying, "You're all clear for the life insurance. We're going to send it off now to the company and you'll be getting your money." And what the defendant does in response is she takes a screenshot of Parshall's email, and who does she send it to? She sends it to Robert Baker. And this email is found on Baker's SD card again, item 157. So this is, again, evidence showing the two of them involved in this conspiracy to get rid of Fabio and to be able to receive his life insurance. After receiving the email from Detective Parshall expecting to be cleared to receive Fabio's life insurance proceeds, the defendant, it goes to New York for Fabio's niece's graduation from medical school, and then there flies with Fabio's family back to Toronto for what you'll hear was the Mirror Awards, a large-scale award ceremony in Canada that took place where she went to accept a Lifetime Achievement Award that was given to Fabio. And so what you see here on her flight back on the top left or in the lounge before, she's taking selfies of herself drinking wine or champagne. This is these two photos, the one on the left and the one in the center in the middle, were taken June 13th of 2017 that she sends to Baker. You can see here she appears to be wearing Baker's Army t-shirt. I told you that Baker previously served time in the Army. The photograph on the top right, based on the bedding, that is a photograph that is taken on Baker's bed in his bedroom on May 31st of 2017, wearing that same shirt. These were recovered from Baker's SD card, item number 157. The photograph on the top right was recovered from Baker's SD card 102. So as I mentioned, not only was the defendant able to have numerous conversations with her co-conspirator Robert Baker face-to-face when they were together, but they also were able to have communications on the use of encrypted apps. And I talked about Viber with you, and I talked about how they changed to WhatsApp after the murder. You can see here on the date of the murder, on the date of their arrest, they are communicating, and you can see at the top there is, in blue with the red arrow, it indicates that this is end-to-end encryption, and it deletes out what their communication was. However, the two messages beneath that, the defendant did not yet have time to either delete them, but what she says that morning on June 14th, not knowing she and Baker are due to be arrested that day after returning home from Toronto the night before, is that she's on her computer cleaning up, deleting various items. That she's
Overruled.
that she is going to unpack and shower, and she tells Baker, "Let me know when you're up," and that's at 11:28 in the morning. 11:59, you can see Baker responds, "I am up, gonna shower." Later that day, the defendant and Baker are arrested and taken into custody. On June 14th, Robert Baker, as I mentioned, is driving the defendant's brand new Mustang. The defendant is seated in the right front passenger seat. They are stopped by Officer Curtis Davis, his partner, along with a team of robbery homicide detectives from the LAPD division. You will hear that day that detectives from robbery homicide were serving simultaneous search warrants that had been previously signed by a judge at their residences. For the defendant, that meant at the 5012 Queen Victoria residence, and for Baker at the 6817 Independence apartment. Evidence that was recovered inside, of the Mustang included the defendant's purse, and inside her purse in the Mustang, the defendant had an iPhone 7. This is item number 119 that I mentioned earlier, with a phone number that I suggested you take down if you are writing notes, but you don't have to because you'll hear about it many more times during trial. The phone number being 818-424-4213. Along with the iPhone 7, number 119, law enforcement also found in the defendant's purse a ZTE flip phone with a different number. Also inside of the defendant's Mustang on the driver's seat was a cell phone belonging to Robert Baker. This was a Samsung Galaxy S8, number 121. You're going to hear that there was evidence that they recovered an S4, that at some point records indicate he also had an S6, which was never recovered, and that surveillance units saw him carrying at the same time 3 different phones. This particular Samsung Galaxy S8, item 121, the phone number is 213-272-1093, and you will hear evidence about the volume of communications between that phone number and that of the defendants. Now, you're also going to hear about what happened during the arrest. There was an operation that was pre-planned and set up from Detective Chris Gable from Robbery Homicide Division. He's now been retired for a few years. That after the defendant and Baker were stopped in the Mustang, the LAPD officers placed the two of them in the back of a black and white police car together. This particular police car was wired with a recording device. When the defendant and Baker were told that they were being arrested for the murder of Fabio Sementilli, you're going to hear their reaction was not one of denial, but that they began to whisper, which you'll see what they said, which is inconsistent with innocence and also consistent with guilt. You're going to see that the defendant made numerous admissions, again, indicating consciousness of guilt. And this whispering takes place because they knew they were being recorded. And you're going to hear that Baker tells the defendant that the vehicle is probably loaded with damn cameras. Your Honor, this might be a good place for a break.
Very good. Let's take our morning recess for 15 minutes. Do you have any supplies?